I'm Jennifer Della Quadri, and this is the Raising Happy Teens podcast, where you learn how to successfully guide your teenager into adulthood without losing your sanity in the process. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. Can I just say how excited I am to record a podcast here for you? Just me and you. I've had a lot of guests on recently, and they have been so amazing, and it's been really fun. There have been some really good conversations, but I'm happy to be here just with you, just us, in our little corner, talking about parenting. Speaking of parenting, as you know, it's summer vacation where I live, and the kids are home. So if you hear noises in the background, movies, screaming, of course, it's screaming at the movie. It's not screaming at each other. Dogs barking. This is what happens when you work from home and there's summer vacation happening. I know you understand because likely you are experiencing it yourself. So I went ahead and said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and record this podcast. Fingers crossed. There are minimal to no interruptions here because what I'm going to be talking about is something that I've been thinking about a lot in the conversations that I've been having with the parents I work with and with the teens I work with. It is having to do with a timeline. The idea behind the timeline of our expectations of what our child should be achieving, accomplishing, doing, all of the things, the expectations that are placed upon them that we have internalized to be the worthy timeline to follow. So before I even get into all that, and if you're listening and you're like, what do you mean timeline? I'm going to start with a story, okay? And bear with me here. So as you know, I used to be a public school teacher. All of my teacher listeners here will completely agree that there are certain expectations students are meant to reach at certain grade levels. And in the educational world, these are called grade level standards, at least where I taught and where I live. So I decided to have some fun and find out where these standards came from. And trust me, I have a direction and there is a story. But I was like, okay, there's these standards and expectations in the educational system. Where they even come from? When I was a teacher, they were handed to me by the district and potentially by the state, and then Common Core standards came, and that was a larger scale thing. But I was like, who decided all of this? And why are they here? And I wanted to know the point of it. And what I found was that it's to ensure consistent expectations for all students. So there's this idea of sameness or rightness, which on paper, it doesn't account for all the differing needs and backgrounds of the students. So just like, hey, your kid's supposed to be able to read and understand this level of text by this time, by this age, or your kid's supposed to be able to multiply fractions by the time they're this old or in this grade. And if they're not, we need to dive in and give them more academic support. And like I said, this may sound like a tangent, but it's setting up the story. And here's the story. So when my daughter was in first grade, she was in the process of learning to read. First grade is a big grade for learning to read. And it was determined through various assessments that she was not at the level she needed to be, according to the standards. So she was put in a reading support group for struggling readers. And it was something that was not in the classroom. She was taken out of the classroom to participate in this group. So there I was, a veteran teacher with a first grader who was struggling to read. And I was freaking out. And all of these doubts started coming up. Like, maybe I should have spent more time working with her outside of school. Maybe I should have taught her the alphabet before kindergarten. Maybe I should have sat down with her and read with her more often. And it all came back to like, there's something that I'm not doing right. Where did I go wrong? Right. And all this self-doubt that came with it. Of course, I was glad she was getting the support that she was getting, but I internalized it as like, I'm a teacher. My kids should be able to read according to the grade level standards, right? And so I decided, hey, I guess I need to become her reading teacher. I'm a certificated teacher. I know how to teach reading. I might as well do this with my own kids. So I brought books home from my own classroom. We sat down and practiced, and it wasn't fun at all. We both hated it. And I only wound up feeling more frustrated and even more worried. And so obviously now she's grown, in the teen years. Looking back, it's crystal clear to me that what I couldn't see at the time was that she was just fine. She was following her own timeline. And her timeline just didn't happen to match this structured timeline that had been created for her. And yes, she did learn how to read very well, in fact. And she's also a gifted writer. She figured it out on her own time. So these timelines are placed on us as parents the moment we find out we're pregnant. The physical, mental, emotional behavior, et cetera, all of those timelines say, here's where they should be. If they are, great. If they're ahead, even better. But if they're behind, bad. Then along the way, labels start to get placed. Low reader, delayed communication, too big, too small, bad at math, not good at making friends. And this is when they're little. Then these timelines, they just continue into middle school and high school, and the labels get more prominent to the point where our kids take on an identity. Not smart, not athletic, awkward, immature, hyperactive. But is it that they don't fit into the system? Or is it that the system wasn't created for them? And I work with a lot of parents of middle schoolers who are really concerned that their teenager isn't organized enough. This is a big thing in middle school. They don't know how to keep their things together, or they're losing their stuff, or they forget assignments, or they just don't do it. And maybe they're falling behind academically. Or maybe they're having trouble finding friends or making friends or getting along with friends. And when I ask them what about this situation bothers them the most, it all boils down to their fear that they won't be successful in the future, that they won't figure it out, or they won't go to college, they won't get the job, they won't find the partner, or be able to live on their own. They feel the need, just like I did back in the day, to jump in and do something about it. So they set up systems, they buy organizers, they buy planners, they have consequences, they hire tutors, and they push. And it only winds up making them feel even more frustrated, and nothing is changing. So, to be clear, I'm not against finding support for a struggling student, especially if they're wanting it. But I want you to notice is the impact your approach is having on your team, on their self-esteem, and also on your relationship with them. Because I also work with a lot of high school parents, same thing. This continues, right? They're worried their teenager has no direction, post-high school plan. Or if they do, it's not what the parents, thought it would be. And usually to the tune of, my teen isn't taking charge of their college application. They're not getting letters of recommendation. They're putting it off. But if they really wanted it, would they be putting it off? And if so, what if they do? What's that natural consequence? That they miss the deadline and they wind up going to a community college or possibly not to college at all? Now, I know I'm a Gen X parent. I get it. It was ingrained in our DNA that the quote appropriate life path was to graduate high school and then go to college. But things are different now. They just are. A college degree is just one of many, many, many paths. And oftentimes it's not even necessary. And so to speak to that, I've also worked with a lot of clients who are in their freshman year of college and they're just wondering, why am I so unmotivated? Why don't I enjoy my classes? And they're just wondering, like, what's the point of this? Because they were sold this idea that the ultimate flex in life was getting into a good college. And when you reach that goal, you have, quote, made it. Like, that's the ultimate goal. But then they get there and they're like, why am I so miserable? And they wonder why they're spending all of this money to learn all of the things that they don't really care about so they can get a job that they don't even really want. And like I said, this isn't everyone's story, but this is something that the teens who I'm working with struggle with big time. And I've also had post-high school clients who have decided they didn't want to go to college and instead they want to forge their own path that may be different than what their parents wanted or thought that they were going to do. And they're miserable because their parent is constantly on them to figure it out, to get the job, to make the money, to be successful and be an adult already. And there are plenty of other stories around this. I'm not saying that this is universal. There are plenty of college students or post-high school students living their best lives. They're totally clear on what they want, where they're going, and good for them. But the parents who come to me are not the parents of those kids. The parents who come to me are struggling because they see their teenager isn't falling into this timeline in some fashion, and they're worried. So if that's you, here's what I want you to know. Your teenager will figure it out. They are figuring it out on their own timeline, their timeline. And if it's helpful and you're someone who likes to visualize things, I want you to think about a timeline, your teenager's timeline, for example. So imagine it in your mind, the line of their life, and think about where they are now compared to what's behind them, and then also what's to come. So they're just in the beginning of their timeline, and there's so much time ahead of them. So it's okay to allow them to be where they are and trust that they will get where they want to go with your love and support along the way. And it's more likely that they're going to get there where they want to go if they are the ones making the decisions. Not because they have to or because they're expected to, because they want to. And then in the meantime, if you find yourself in this spiral of fear and doubt, like I mentioned, I was experiencing at the beginning of this episode, and you're feeling the need to jump in and fix it, I want you to stop and take a step back and just acknowledge and recognize the fear and know that it's coming from a place of love. The ideologies that you have, they've been formed throughout your lifetime, and they were created through the messages you received growing up. And these messages were sent by other people with their own history and their own ideologies. And all of these beliefs were for survival. So, how might have following that specific timeline that you have in your mind as being acceptable, how might have that been helpful for your parents, for example, or your grandparents to graduate high school, follow this timeline, go to college, get this job, right? Times have been different. And what would have happened if they didn't follow that timeline? Or maybe they didn't, but what were the repercussions? How might have they been treated by society or by their friends or by their family? And what was at stake for them? And then I want you to think about how things are different now. So, how are you different? And how is your teen different than in the past, than your parents and your grandparents? And then from that place, you can start to make decisions about what to do and how to support your teenager as they transition into adulthood. So it's all about coming back to the present and letting the present inform the future, not the past. The past is there, it's information. The present is here for you to analyze and decide what you want to do about this. And I say this all the time, but remember, it's not easy to do. This is generational change I'm talking about. It's shifting paradigms. It's having the courage to think for yourself and decide to do something different or to support your teen in doing something different, in learning to read at a later age, or learning something else like astrophysics at the age of 14. What are they interested in, right? And encouraging that versus looking at it in comparison to this arbitrary timeline that somebody set up to make it be the standard for appropriate development. And you get to decide as a parent. It takes courage, right? And you're not doing it alone. This is the other thing I want you to know. You're not doing it alone. All of the parents that I'm working with, they are doing this work. The kids I'm working with, they're doing this work. And I'm here. I'm doing this work. So is everyone listening to this podcast. We're all in this together for the betterment of our kids and our families and ultimately the future of the world for future generations. And if you'd like support along the way, I'm here. I invite you to schedule a free consultation to learn more about my parent coaching program. The link to schedule is in the show notes. And I also just really want to thank you for listening. If you've listened this far, if you listen to this show, you are part of this change. And I really, really would love it if you would rate, review, and subscribe to get this show into the earbuds of more parents. The more parents can have that compassion and understanding that what's going on here is hard, that parenting a teenager is hard, and that they also don't have to do it on their own, and to just feel that connection, that there's more here for them, the better, right? The better for society, the better for the kids, the better for all of us. So I'd love it if you would share with friends, give me a little review. That would be so great, just to spread the word. And as always, just thank you so much for being here. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. If you liked this episode, I'd like to invite you to join Raising Happy Teens, my free online community for parents of teenagers, where every week I host Ask a Coach. You bring your parenting questions, and I provide expert advice and coaching. Click the link in the show notes to join today. I'll see you inside.